Hey there everybody, Travis Bowman here. I'm a fingerstyle guitar player and retro video game nerd here to talk about the Neo Geo AES. So, brief history, I didn't have this console when it was relevant and I just got into it about a year and a half ago. And it's a really fun console, it's a really cool piece of gaming history. So I'm here to talk about my experiences with it and to let you guys know whether or not it's going to be worth it for you. So the Neo Geo AES came out around 1990, and the idea with the Neo Geo AES was that you can finally take those legitimate arcade games and have them on your TV at home. And yeah, the Sega Genesis kind of did that too in the late 80s. They were claiming that you could play your arcade games at home, but they were more like ports. You know, they weren't actual arcade games. They were ports of those arcade games. And for the most part, those games on the Sega Genesis are awesome. They're still good. But they're kind of watered down compared to their arcade counterparts. Neo Geo did not do that. What you could play in the arcade, you can definitely play at home on this console. But as a result of that, you had to pay a little bit of a premium. This console was very expensive when it first came out, and the games were not cheap either. You had to pay upwards of $200 per game to have them at home. So it was a different time, definitely different time. But fast forward to the future, those games are still expensive. In fact, even more so than they were because they're obviously not being manufactured anymore and collectors go crazy for the Neo Geo stuff. Getting into it is not going to be cheap. You have to be extremely lucky. You would have to be the luckiest guy ever to jump into the Neo Geo console for a cheap price. So the AES, Advanced Entertainment System, that's the home version. You can get into a different version of this console called the MVS, which is more akin to the arcades. It's basically the same game but different format, different style cartridge. That being said, the MVS is also something that you can get into at home these days. You can find a consoleized MVS to play your games on, which is probably a better option actually. Those MVS cartridges are quite a bit less expensive than the AES cartridges are. So if you're going to get into the Neo Geo AES, where should you start? Well, finding a console is probably the best place to start. You've got a few different controllers too that you can use on the system. The main controller is this arcade stick right here. It's actually a really cool arcade stick and it still holds up today. It's classic Neo Geo. It's got micro switches in the joystick and the buttons are really nice and clicky. It's a good time. It's an awesome arcade stick. The button layout looks a little wonky with that diagonal shape, but I promise you get used to it pretty quickly. My favorite controller for Neo Geo stuff in general is this. It's this Neo Geo CD pad. Now it has the micro switchy thumb stick and the buttons are also really nice and big and it melts in your hands, man. This controller is amazing. I really do love it. And since we're in the future now, far away from the year of 1990, there are also other options that you can do for controllers as well, like this wireless one from 8-Bit Do, which mimics the original CD pad. And if you're like me, you got a lot of consoles that you like to play. Wireless controllers are so awesome. You don't have to deal with the wires and the cables and stuff like that. So the main thing that really turns people away from the Neo Geo console is the price. It's not just the console that's expensive, it's also the games. And to find legitimate games out there for a good price is just getting astronomically difficult. It's so hard to find a good game for a good price. I've got a review video on 3 different flash cartridges that you can check out on my channel if you want to look into those. But I'll just show you this one real quick. This is the multi-game 161-in-1. A lot of people start getting into the Neo Geo with this cartridge right here, and that's because it's the cheapest option. Now you don't have an SD card in this, so you can't like add and remove games, but what's on here is what you get. That's it. It's actually pretty nice for the most part. A lot of games are missing, but on the flip side of that coin, a lot of these games are just, you know, hacked versions of the legitimate games too, which is, in my opinion, not that great. But to each their own. This is a great way to jump into it, and this cartridge, depending on where you get it from, might run you anywhere between like 80 and 150 bucks, which that's cheap if we're talking Neo Geo. That's actually pretty darn cheap. So now we get to the big question of, is it worth it to actually own? And like everything else, it's a subjective thing. It's up to you, and it's up to your specific setup whether or not it's going to be a good thing for you to have it. It's a really cool piece of gaming history. It's amazing to actually have this in my house. And for the most part, I do enjoy playing it, you know, but it does have its problems. They need to be recapped like everything else does in this day and age. Most of these retro consoles are getting older and the capacitors are aging, and then you have to deal with leaking capacitors, which is not good. I have had my console professionally recapped and RGB modded, so that's good. But just keep in mind that you might have to do a little maintenance on this console. It's extremely old at this point. My console's not in the best shape, but it works. It works, and that's all that matters, you know. So I'm doing this video from a point of view of talking to you, the person that might not know that much about the AES, but is curious about playing some fighting games on this console in your house. So if I were you, this is what I would do. I would say don't do the AES. And that's because it's just extremely expensive and there are better alternatives out there. What I would suggest is not make the mistake that I did and just jump headfirst into AES. But if you really just want to play the games on original hardware, go the MVS route. You can get a consoleized MVS that's going to be cheaper, more reliable, and it's pretty much the same thing. You can use the same controllers and you can play the same games, just a different format, just a little bit of a different format. But with these flash cartridges that I showed in my other video, this is the cheap one, and then you've got the super expensive ones like the Neo SD and the Neo SD Pro with some extra features like being able to play Neo Geo CD games on your console. Those options carry over to the MVS as well. You can get MVS versions of all of that. Honestly, the MVS is the way to go, and I've see that now after I've dived headfirst into this AES stuff. Should you completely be turned away from AES? No, this is a subjective thing, you know. I'm just letting you know that I've had some issues with my AES. In particular, it's a first revision console, and I've got a 5-volt power supply. Some of the later revisions are 9-volt, so you kind of have to be careful about that. You have to know what revision your console is and what power supply to use, otherwise you could fry the thing. And that's kind of scary. So that turns a lot of people away too, because you never really know what revision and what power supply that you need until you open up your console. You have to unscrew it and take the plastic off and look at the actual board to see the revision. And that turns a lot of people away. I don't know what it is. Some people just, they don't even want to deal with that. They don't want to touch it. They don't want to open up the console at all. But with a used console, you know, you have to be careful. Somebody could have done a shell swap or something at some point and you wouldn't know, and that's a nightmare. That one fatal mistake could cost you $600 or $700, which is insane. There are several alternatives and means of purchasing an MVS consoleized version, and I think honestly that's probably the way to go. That being said, I don't own an MVS as of right now. I can only speak to what I've seen with my experiences with the AES and what other people have told me about their experiences with the MVS. But in my opinion, the AES, it's a really cool piece of technology. It's a really cool piece of gaming history, and I'm glad that I've spent some time with it. But to be honest with you, I think I'm probably going to sell it, because I would rather have those funds be allocated in other areas of retro gaming that I really do enjoy. And now that I've got this console all set up with an RGB mod, I've got it professionally recapped, new capacitors that are not cheap capacitors, they're going to be lasting for quite some time, and I've got the controllers and everything. This console is going to be really cool for somebody. They won't have to deal with all the crap that I had to deal with when I got this console. Capacitors were not installed correctly, and it wasn't looking good. I'm glad that I got it recapped when I did, because any longer, I'm afraid that those would have done some damage to my board actually. So I'd love to know what you guys think in the comment section below. Do you have any experiences with the Neo Geo AES or the MVS for that matter? Let me know what you guys think about it. This is meant to be a discussion video. I've had a lot of problems with my AES and some flash cartridges from Terra Onion. I've got videos on my channel detailing all of that stuff. So if you do want to jump into the AES or the MVS for that matter, and you're looking into getting a flash cart solution so you don't have to spend a bunch of money on legitimate games, I would highly encourage you to check out those videos so you know what you're getting into, and I'll link those in the description of this video below. Thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Thanks for subscribing, and I'll catch you guys at the next video. Thanks so much.